This is WCRN Weekend with your host, Pat Rice.
You are now tuned in to another episode of WCRN Weekends with Pat Rice on AM 830. And on today's show, we have a very familiar voice and also a host that's part of the WCRN family with us, and that is Mr. Gary S. Goldman. He is the host of the show Business, Politics, and Lifestyles, which is on every Saturday morning. But he is also the president of G&M New England Pavement Maintenance and Mr. Pothole Man. I'm pretty sure most of us has heard the commercials on WCRN. Very catchy, and hey, I'd like to welcome Gary onto the show.
Good morning, or good afternoon, Pat. Thanks for having me here.
Anytime. So, could you tell us a little bit about your background? First of all, how did you get involved with pavement maintenance and construction?
So I got into the construction industry while I was in high school and college. It was a means for me to pay my way through college to earn income through the summer months. So I started a pavement company. I used to walk around the neighborhood seal coating driveways. And then I got into the landscaping end of it. And as I was in college, the company continued to grow. I graduated college with a Bachelor's of Science degree in accounting and decided that I was going to continue doing the landscaping and paving for a bit. And I went on to get my MBA. Took numerous job interviews and said, wait a second here, the money they're offering me now is nowhere near what I'm making as my, self-employed business owner. So I continued to grow the companies, and that's what I did for a number of years. I grew my landscape company, the first company through, I think it was 1996, and I sold it, got out of the landscape industry for a little while, and continued the pavement company. Got back into the landscape industry because a lot of my old clients were begging me to get back in. And the work that we did was all commercial work, office buildings, condominiums, very little homeowner work. And then decided to grow that landscape company until 2012, where I sold it to a large conglomerate and continued on with the pavement. Over and above that, I do a lot of consulting work with contractors all across the country, teaching them operations and estimating strategies.
Wow, that's a lot. So you have a lot on your plate.
I always have a lot on my. I'm one of those guys that enjoy a lot on their plate. As we were saying earlier, always have a plan how to operate things and how to keep things going. And I always have a lot on my plate, but I enjoy it.
Exactly. It's an all-day buffet.
It's an all-day buffet. I mean, look, whenever you're a business owner, it's never a small business guy or woman. It never ends. There's always something to do. No matter how much expertise you have working with you, it always falls back on your plate. So
exactly. It's a lot of work. You always got to be on the tip of your toes, on top of your game. Could you tell us a little bit about the impact of taking the lowest bid? Because you must deal with a lot of city or state or private contracts that you need a bid on,
right,
competing with other guys around you, competition.
The nature of the two markets that I was involved in, which is commercial landscape and pavement, which is commercial pavement, we do everything from, maintaining a parking lot, which is crack sealing it, line striping, seal coating repairs, to complete renovation of a lot. So it's very competitive. We do not get involved in a lot of public works type of things. It's a whole different niche. We do it. We've done some, but that's not a thing. But the competitiveness of the business is incredible. And in the last few years, it has become even more competitive. And low bids, a lot of times, are what property managers or building owners go by. And I've never been a low bidder. I'm usually a middle or upper bidder. That's just the way our numbers come out. But we sell quality, service, responsiveness, value, and communication. Intangibles that a lot of people don't see, but they're the heart of what we're trying to do for a client.
Mm. And, sometimes you see on the news, these news shows will make a segment out of a contractor that doesn't finish their work. Does that happen a lot in this industry?
I think it happens more on residential, that people that work with individual homeowners than it does on commercial work. I've seen it happen on commercial work, but that is always a risk of a low bid, because there are companies out there that can provide a low bid, that have production down to a certain system, and they're profitable. All right. So even though their bids are low, it's just the way their overhead is and the way they operate. But there's a lot of companies that will throw a bid out there low to get the work, thinking they're going to keep themselves busy. And that's where it becomes dangerous, because if we talk about pavement and we're paving a parking lot at so many inches thick, we should all be using the same amount of tonnage, which is costing us all about the same amount of money. Then there's the labor variable and your overhead variable. But contractors especially like to tell themselves a story that, well, I can do it for less, or maybe I'll skimp a little on the pavement and nobody will catch me. Mm-hmm. And that's what gets them in trouble a lot of times. Someone holding them to the specification.
Oh, definitely. And it's labor. It's really a lot of hard work. Me personally, like the average Joe can't just hop right into a project not knowing exactly what they're doing. How many layers does it take to complete a pavement job?
If we're talking, whether it's a roadway or a parking lot, it's, a good subbase, which is gravel, 8, 12 inches plus of gravel compacted, and then, a first course of pavement, which could be 2 to 3 or 4 inches, and then a top course of like 2 inches of pavement. So the asphalt itself is usually always done in a two-layer increment.
Okay, and how long would a project usually take, let's say, for like a mid-sized parking lot?
3-4 days to, if you're completely renovating it, taking it out and putting it back together. Because there's a lot of times when you open up a parking lot, you never know what's under there. You find a drainage problem, or there's not as much gravel as you thought. The soil is very bad, so you got to take more material out. So it varies, but it's 3-4 days on a parking lot. And nowadays, that's a big thing, because no one wants to close their business down. So you have to try and do it in off hours or break a lot into subsections, and so they can still operate and keep their businesses open. We run into that all the time.
Yeah, I can imagine that. Would you say that you would have to do majority of the work like overnight or early in the morning hours?
It varies a lot of times. When it's the maintenance end of it, just the seal coating, the line striping, we try to do on weekends. We do some work at night. It's hard to do work to me, you don't get that same quality work at night that you do during the day.
No.
But most of the time we end up focusing on, we put a plan together, logistics plan, and say we're going to close this part of the lot for a day and a half, the next part of the lot for a day and a half, and just work your way around to minimize the impact on the business, because that's what it's all about. A property manager doesn't want tenants calling and screaming because we're holding their clients up from coming into their stores. So.
Yeah, no, I see it all the time on like social media. You probably know about the 109 project.
Which one? Oh, in Medway. Yeah, that seems to be going on forever.
It's been going on forever. It
Right.
seems like every summer they tear it up and they're redoing the same thing. But see all the time people complaining online. When is the 109 project going to be done?
And that's usually, we see that a lot I see it a lot driving around with public works types jobs. A lot of that's funding, the way the money is funded, and there's two schools of thought. When I look at those jobs, I'm always working in my head saying, I do it this way and be in and out of there in that X amount of times. But when you're working on public works projects, the inspection process, the funding process is so different, it gets held up. And unfortunately, businesses are the ones that pay.
Mm-hmm. How many people are involved with a project like that for public works? Like the whole town, really?
Yeah, there's the engineering department in the town. There is the highway department. Then there's outside engineers, then the contractor. And depending on the scope of the work or how large the contractor is, very few contractors now do all the work in-house themselves. So they have subs working under them. So, there's a lot of planning and a lot of PERT shots put together to, evaluations to know, okay, I did my job. I got to make sure the next guy's in here that day doing his. Otherwise, you get into the situations that you discussed where jobs are getting tied up and businesses are closed because the people do not have access to the parking lots.
Mm. And earlier on, you mentioned about some obstacles you might run into when you tear up, a parking lot and there's like a drainage system. For guys that are just getting into this business and industry, what are some other major obstacles that someone might run into?
Well, first of all, throughout the country and in the state of Massachusetts, as soon as you dig dig a hole for a tree, as a matter of fact, you need to call DigSafe to mark all your underground utilities that are known. So that's the first thing. I don't know if you've been watching the news and you cover the news in the morning, there have been a lot of construction sites where they're hitting gas lines when they're excavating that have been DigSafe. So a lot of times a pipe's put in, it's not put exactly where they thought. So, the utilities, whether it's electrical, gas, a water pipe, cable, fiber optics underground, you've got to be careful even when it's marked. Those are usually the big obstacles that someone can run into a problem with. But, most of those public works jobs, there's testing done, there's borings done to check the soil to see what's in there before they even dig the first hole, so they don't run into surprises all the time. Surprises not only cost money, as we all know, but surprises take up time. And when you have someone's road in front of a business ripped up, it's got to be put back together relatively quickly, or people are going to suffer economically.
And start complaining.
Yeah. And I mean, it's the same thing on private work. You have so much time to get something done, and before people are going to get upset.
Could you tell us about some of the quality of the supplies that you need when it comes to paving?
So, most of if you're paving, whether it's a road or a parking lot, the pavement materials usually, there's state specifications on types of pavement that you should use and how the pavement should be made up. So even on private jobs that we do, we'll use a state spec mix. When I say state spec mix, that, an engineer for the state has determined the asphalt has to be made up of this size stone, this much oil, this much sand, et cetera.
Wow.
And yeah, which is very important. Nowadays they're trying, especially in New England with the freeze and thaw cycles, much to the dismay of Mr. Pothole Man, because we like potholes, but you will have a situation where they're trying different polymers and different other things to put into the mix to give it a little more flexibility to see if that works through the winter months. But, I personally believe, my theory is you can mix all this stuff into the pavement or try these different things. It's the weather, and it's each winter cycle is different. So one winter it may work, the next winter it's more severe, and the pavement may not hold up as well. So I'm for the old-fashioned pavement, just, good stone, good oil, a good strong mix. Make sure your sub-base, your gravel is proper. And no matter what you do, you're going to have problems with a road in New England. It's just a fact of life.
Definitely. I mean, growing up in Massachusetts and New England, we're all familiar with potholes. I went to college out in Western Mass, and I just remember it was by the Berkshires, and we took this back road, and it looked like aliens landed in the middle of the road.
Right.
It was just a huge crater. It's like if you were driving at night going 40 miles per hour, you would do some serious damage to your car.
Yeah, and every winter's different. And, since we started that pothole division of our company, I follow the winters a little bit, the road and the calls that come in when I go into the office. And the last couple winters haven't been bad for potholes, but there was, I don't know, maybe after that bad winter in 2015, crazy the amount of potholes that were in the road. So, it varies, and no matter how well a road is built, I think you're still going, it's just the nature of where we live. It's what we're going to deal with. And I think most people around here, in their own way, they accept it.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of wear and tear either way. Do you think that one day they'll come up with a recipe for the pavement that only goes by one simple set of ingredients?
No, well, I think there may be a certain ingredient that they all get, but it has to be modified to the environment or the location within the country. Only because, again, out west you have the extreme heat where that's going to suck up the oils out of the asphalt, so you got to compensate for that. Here we go into these freeze and thaw cycles. So I'm not sure we'll ever get to one recipe. I know you pull state spec for all 50 states, and you're going to find 50 different specifications of the way asphalt should be made. In each particular state, they have their own thought process, even within the New England region.
How would you say that climate change has kind of affected business, especially within the snow removal business? Because back in the day, we used to get snowstorms with feet and feet of snow, and now it's really hit or miss.
So here's my thing, and I've been involved in snow removal for years, commercial snow removal. We move a lot of snow in the wintertime. I think it's more cyclical. I don't want to get into a debate about environmental changes, but I think
all up for it.
there are. Yeah, we can do that another time. I have no problem. But I believe there are issues with the environment. There has to be the way, the expansion of automobiles and everything else. I think if you look at weather charting, and I've done some of this, and we hire weather services in the winter to monitor the snow for us, so when we know it's coming. And when I talk to the meteorologists there, and we talk about patterns from years and years ago, it's very much cyclical to me. We had some great winters 2012, 13, 14, 15. And even the last few winters haven't been that far off beat. But, the weather is just, I think it's cyclical. There's definitely environmental factors going on that affects things. I haven't bought this whole superstorm thing yet. But the winters seem to average out most of the time. I mean, we had a winter, I think it was the winter of 11 and 12, where we only had 20 inches of snow the whole winter. And everyone's freaking out, it's all, global warming. But if you look back in history, you'll find patterns where we had the same thing. You had a winter of very little snow or no snow. So, there's schools of thought on it and what's going on with the environment. There's a number of things, but I think a lot of it's just cyclical, personally.
Yeah, so it seems like there's a pattern.
There's definitely a pattern, yeah.
Would you say there's other environmental factors that affect the roads and pavement besides weather?
Yeah, I mean, besides weather, there could be. I'm sort of a weather geek when it comes to that, so that's what I really focus on. But I think the weather's the big part of it, that affects pavement. Whether there's other environmental things, there could be. I wouldn't be equipped to answer that question.
So basically, I would say that you're an entrepreneur as you started up your own business.
Started my own business, yep.
And you've been very successful at it. You've been doing it for years and years now,
yep,
in all different kind of sectors, whether it's snow removal, pavement, even landscaping.
Right.
First, before we get into maybe giving out advice for other entrepreneurs, what would you say was probably the most toughest or hardest line of work?
I think the hardest part of the toughest line of work within the pavement or landscaping,
yeah,
you're saying? The hardest part of that is just getting the right systems in place within your company. Once you have processes and systems, I'm convinced you can do just about anything, and that was the toughest thing, because as you hire employees, you want everybody doing the same thing or following the same roadmap within the company, especially when you're working for large commercial accounts where you may be doing multiple jobs for them. So the hardest thing about, any of the businesses that I've operated is making sure you have a plan and a process and systems in place to make it consistent, because it's all like a wheel. Every spoke has to be lined up.
Mm-hmm.
The office, your operational people, your marketing people, everything has to be in the same sync to make it work right for the end result, which is your client.
Absolutely. And so for advice for any people that want to start up their own business, how much money would you say that you need to start a successful business?
And every business is different. Even a paving company, landscape company. What I always tell clients if I put my consulting hat on now, you have to sit down and figure out, put a business plan together of what you're trying to do. And then from your business plan, you have to start doing some budgeting, even though they're guesstimates to some degree. And that will tell you, you back into your numbers. I'm going to need X amount of dollars for overhead, telephone, advertising. And then from that, you sort of build up. I need X amount of dollars for materials, supplies, equipment, and you sort of push yourself into a sales number. So it's hard to say exactly what it is. Every business and every business plan is different, but you have to build that plan. You have to have a plan of action, a business plan, and develop budgeting. And then the first couple of years, it's adjustments all the time. And then every year it's an adjustment, but you have to have a plan.
It's all about having a plan. Like people say, if you write something down, you're more likely to do it compared to just being like, I'll do it. Tomorrow comes, it passes by, you still didn't do it.
Look, a plan is a blueprint. It's going to be broken. It's very few plans that I have ever written or clients that I've written go verbatim exactly the way they should, but they keep you in step. They give you something to do your checks and balance off of. So if without a plan, you don't know where you are. Am I going in the right direction? Should this particular cost be this high, or are the sales numbers right this much? Is the labor too high? What's the expense on equipment this month, the fuel? These are the types of things you got to keep your eye on. Without a plan, and the plan includes the budget, you wouldn't know what's going on. It's just, you're guessing every month. And sometimes, even if you're a one-man show or one-man operation, and I tell people this that I work with, if your plan is one piece of paper, that's better than no plan at all. Because it's something to go by. So
we got to wrap this up shortly, but I want to get into a little bit about how you got into radio and your show, Business, Politics, and Lifestyle.
So that's a great question. So I was approached by a former salesperson at the station, Guy Ferranti, to do some advertising from I also owned a garden center and a power equipment store, and he came down to, my nephew was running it for me, and he came down to sell me some advertising. And at one point he asked me, he goes, if you could do a show, he said to me, you ought to come in and do a show on landscaping. I said, I'm the wrong guy. He says, what do you mean? I'm like, he goes, well, you're a landscaper. I said, but the people that know the plants and know the certain parts of this business, we'd all have to come in and do the show because it's a team effort. So if you did a show, what would you want to do it on? I said, I don't know, I'd like to do a show on business, small business. So we first started the show. It was called the Small Business Hour. And I walked in the studio at the time in Worcester at 6 o'clock on a Saturday morning without ever being on the air. The red light went on and I just started talking. And that was in 2010. So it's been several years since the show, we kept the Small Business Hour, and then it equated into politics and other things. And that's when we went to the Business, Politics, and Lifestyle. So,
8 years strong. And I know you've kind of bounced around to different stations as well. Yeah.
And I done some on some Boston stations, some other local stations, but my heart is with CRN. I really enjoy working at this radio station. I think it's a great station. I think there's great people that work here. Never mind that we have a great signal that reaches quite a distance. Yeah. So, and our listeners are just incredible. Our listeners out there are great. They're loyal. And, that when they email you and they tell you the good, the bad, and the ugly about the show, but that's how you learn, right? They may not have liked the guest, and you just try to do the right thing to get everyone involved and talk about the right issues. And, you and I were talking during the break that people seem to equate the station as a certain political view. And we all have our own political views, but what I tell everybody, I am open-minded. I want everybody's view and will always respect whoever calls the station and talk to you and give you your time to express your opinion. Your opinion's welcome. And being respectful to your callers is the most important thing.
Absolutely. And, you talk about how you might mention something on air that someone might not agree with, and you can actually thank Ted A for this one. But he mentioned a story about you and Joe Manigotti hosting a show, and you guys were talking about a certain topic. I believe it was Black Lives Matter. Would you mind telling us a little bit about that story?
I was hosting a show one night on another radio station, and, I throw it out there that I'm a firm believer. I'm like, I want someone to call me from Black Lives Matter and tell me what your mission is and explain to me what you're trying to get across, because maybe I don't understand it, and I don't think a lot of our listeners understand that, because all I'm seeing right now is you using this as a facade to create chaos on the street. And I had somebody call me that was a Black Lives Matter person, and he was kind of irate at my comments. He told me that I didn't understand because I wasn't black. And I said, it has nothing to do about being black. It's about being, inquiring and asking questions. So the individual did not like my perspective on this and made kind of a threat, we'll put it that way, to the point that we had to be escorted out of the, station that night. And even when I was on this station, he found his way to this station a couple of times, and a former producer and him used to have a few on Saturday mornings, have some chats. He would wouldn't want to come on the air. He'd yell at the producer about me as opposed to coming on, which is so, I have my opinion. Anyone will tell you that. I can be very opinionated myself. That's me. But when I sit in front of this mic, I want to give everybody the opportunity to express their thoughts, their opinion, and have dialogue. Let's debate if we disagree. Let's talk about it and just walk away as friends, and that's the end of it. Nowadays, it's you or me, or my thought, your thought, and that's the only way it can be, which is so wrong. And that's what this gentleman's problem was. He did not want to talk to me about it. He just wanted to express his dismay in what I had to say, which just led me to believe, to further continue my conversation that, okay, it's just a facade to create chaos because you're not telling me what you're trying to do. Now, with that said, I have talked to people off the air that are in Black Lives organizations that have eloquently we've had conversation explain to me what their mission is. I may not agree with it 100%, but I appreciate that, and I understand it now. Again, doesn't mean I'm going to agree with it, but at least we had good dialogue.
Exactly, and that's what talk radio is all about. And I like how you mentioned earlier, nowadays a lot of people, it's either my way or the highway.
It drives me insane.
We need to be able to, Alan Margulies would be, like, let's say, the heads around the table.
Right.
We need to get around the table and have discussions and conversations like grown-ups.
Right.
And not be like little kids at the playground throwing sand at each other, which you can debate and attack each other, but at the end of the day, everyone needs to hear out where the other person's coming from and understand and not be ridiculous.
I have some friends that were philosophically so different politically, and we have great conversation, debate. It never gets hostile, and we're done. We're still great friends, and that's the way it should be.
Absolutely. Okay, so one last thing. What do you think AM radio, or radio in general, is missing nowadays?
I don't know if it's, I don't know if it's missing anything. I think too many times hosts take their personal perspective on the air, and that open-mindedness is, it's not. This is the way I look at life in general. You have your thought process, or I have a thought process. You have a thought process, and maybe the truth is always somewhere in the middle. It's that somewhere in the middle that seems to be missing. And I think a lot of shows that I listen to a lot of times just seem to be coming from one perspective. Now, people may say that about my show. I try to interject other things to make it as fair and balanced. I'm not going to give up my values because I have a belief, my core values are my core values, and I'm never going to give those up. But that somewhere in the middle always seems to be missing.
Perfectly said. I agree with that. Not everything's black and white.
Right,
There's always
exactly.
a gray area.
There's always a gray area.
Okay, so Gary, why don't you let people know when your show is on, when they can tune in, and how people can get in contact with you for G&M Pavement and Mr. Pothole Man?
Okay, the show airs Saturdays from 8 to 10 a.m. here on WCRN, and I can be reached for my pavement company at Gary@gnmnewengland.com, Gary@gnmnewengland.com.
Excellent. Hey, thank you, Gary.
My
for coming
pleasure.
on to my show.
This has been WCRN Weekend and your host, Pat Rice.